The Tattooist of Auschwitz is a new TV series that has just been released, which is based on the 2018 novel of the same title, which sold more than 3 million copies around the world and was a New York Times bestseller and an international bestseller. So it felt like a TV adaptation was always going to be something that was going to get made. Focusing on Lale Sokolov, who was imprisoned in Auschwitz, this TV series is focused on the story of his meetings with Heather Morris, the author of the book, as he entered his mind and told his story of survival and love during a time which was surrounded by death and the fear of the worst during a terrible time in history. So with that, let's jump into the video. Here is a review of the Tattooist of Auschwitz. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Tattooist of Auschwitz is a love story, but I'll use that term loosely considering where and when the show set. However, it was heavily focused around the love that was formed between Lale and Gita during their time spent as prisoners in Auschwitz. However, from a tonal perspective, because of the horrific events that occurred within the gates of the concentration camp, it isn't like any kind of love story that you've seen before. It's more so focused on how even in the darkest of times, love can find a way and will survive. Hence why the Barbra Streisand song titled Love Will Survive was the final thing that we heard as it played over the credits of the final episode. Right at the forefront of this show was the depiction of the horrors that were committed to millions of people who were murdered inside of Auschwitz. The billowing black smoke in the background of a lot of shots, the ash falling from the sky, the screams and gunshots that would be present, the horrific conditions and the evil mindset and behaviors of the guards was something which was ever present, and it painted the terrifying reality that many people went through during that time. The way that this story was told was by having Heather Morris meeting with and interviewing Lale in the present day as he entered that part of his mind from where he was a prisoner when he was taken in 1942 to him ultimately escaping in 1945. Throughout this show, we saw that within the present day, Lale re-entering that dark part of his mind to tell the story was something which was causing the present day to take on that certain darkness too. Hence why figures from the past were sitting alongside him and talking to him on the sofa. The conflict that he felt within his own mind over Beretsky was something which I thought was particularly interesting in the show. Beretsky was a guard at the camp and assisted in allowing Lale to meet with Gita after he met her when he first put her identification number on her arm when she arrived there. There were also moments within the episode where Beretsky helped out Lale when he was caught by other guards with items that he shouldn't have had, and also in getting Gita a job, which meant that Lale could see her on a regular basis. So there was this extremely evil human being who was murdering people, but at the same time was helping out Lale in his own weird way. This was something which plagued Lale's mind in the show, and it made sense as to why he kept seeing him in the present day and was haunted by his memory. At the end of the show, we saw that Lale almost felt as though the life that he eventually went on to lead, the happy one with Gita, the person who was the love of his life, was partially due to Beretsky, because he felt as though if he hadn't have allowed him to have become the tattooist, then he may have been killed as part of a random selection, maybe not survived or even met Gita in the first place. Because, after all, it was only with the assistance of Beretsky that Lale kept seeing her. So there was this sense of having your life mapped out by somebody who was extremely evil and you despised as a human. So it was something which was actually quite haunting to think about. When Beretsky said to Lale that he'd been like his brother whilst they were together before Lale was marched out, it was something which almost showed that there was no real conceptual understanding of the situation with Beretsky. Did he actually think that they were like brothers and there was a bond? Did he not realize that Lale was only being like that to keep him happy in order to survive and to ensure that Gita was safe? Maybe not. Within real life, it was said that Beretsky was considered to be a simpleton and to be less intelligent when compared to the other defendants during his trial. So maybe that was the reasoning for the type of persona that he had in the show. When it came to the performances in the show, there was something that did grate on me slightly. Personally, I didn't quite understand why Lale had what sounded like an English accent, but everybody else in the show didn't. I found that to be a bit confusing and it took me out of it a little bit. It obviously didn't taint the viewing experience, but it was something that I just noticed and couldn't quite understand why, as the older Lale didn't have an English accent, nor did the real Lale in the video at the end. The performance from the main cast was something that I thought was really strongly carried out. Anna Prochniak as Gita, Melanie Linsky as Heather Morris, Harvey Keitel as Lale, Jonah Hauer-King as the young Lale, and Jonas Navy as Beretsky. They all delivered convincing performances which had such weight and emotion behind them, and it really allowed us to connect with each of them in very different ways. The connection that Jonah and Dana had was something which I think was felt through the screen, and the reunion that they had when they made it to Bratislava was one that you felt due to the desire that they had to be with one another when they simply couldn't be, and also didn't know if the other was dead or alive. The love story of it got more of a focus in the final 2 episodes when they both escaped the camp at different time periods, but before then it was the love that was formed, but also the death and devastation and evilness that was surrounding it. In terms of a visual perspective, this show really didn't hold back in what it was prepared to show us. Whether that be the murdering of people, people being beaten, bodies being shown, and the suffering that was also present. So it was definitely striking to look at throughout every episode. The haunting chime that would often be present was something which really cut through this show as well, reminding us that death was something that was happening all throughout the day, and people that we came to be familiar with in the show would just be executed. I found what happened to Tomasz to be something that stuck with me after the show finished. The fact that he saw death as being free was just so harrowing. You could understand why in that moment, because his wife who was pregnant was killed there and that was his whole life. So he felt as though he almost had nothing to live for and no reason to survive there. It was painful to watch and it was such an emotional moment. The transformation of Lale going from a prisoner inside of the camp to them being a prisoner in Austria and seeing why he viewed himself as this yes man was a moment which was just devastating to witness. He thought he'd finally found safety after escaping, but in reality he was just a prisoner that was in better conditions than before and being tasked to do terrible things. But because he wanted to survive, just like in Auschwitz, he went along with it, even though it pained him to do so. One thing that I found particularly interesting about the story of the Tattooist of Auschwitz is that it's actually been heavily criticized by the Auschwitz Memorial Research Center. They questioned the novel's factual inaccuracies and stated that the entire image of reality of Auschwitz displayed in the book is built on exaggerations, misinterpretations, and understatements. They also said that they believe it could be perceived as dangerous and disrespectful to history if it's read in the Czech translation and it's taken as fact. So that was something that I didn't properly consider until researching after watching the show. I would say that this is a good show at its core. I feel 6 episodes was probably enough for the story to be told. 8 would have probably felt too long and drawn out, considering that we did get it in 6. The 6-episode run allowed it to highlight the atrocities, horrors, and fight for survival that many people fell victim to and had to endure. It showed the love story of Gita and Lale, but also showed the conflict that was in Lale's mind in the present day over whether his life was the way it was because of the evil man, so the survivor's guilt was something that was at the forefront. At the end of the show, with Lale walking back to his bed and passing away in the final moments, it was almost tying into the real-life fact that Morris was interviewing him for 3 years up until his death in 2006. She was initially meeting with him and interviewing him so that the story could be told in the form of a screenplay, but following his death, 3 years later, it was first suggested to Morris about changing the approach and telling Lale's story in the form of a book, which is what obviously happened. Whilst there were a lot of emotional moments throughout the show, one of the main moments that I thought was really powerful was the real footage that was present at the end where Heather was interviewing Lale in real life. It just reminded us that the story that was being told was something that somebody actually lived through and survived. It's just astonishing and you can't quite believe it. I'd say that this show is definitely worth a watch. The first episode will most definitely draw you in, and from there you'll probably see it through to the end. What did you think of this show? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.